Welcome, viewers of the Where Are They Now series, where we are featuring former, past, and I guess in today's case, current seed grantees. In celebration of our 20th anniversary, we thought it would be kind of cool to visit some of those successful founders from the earlier days and catch up with them. And so today I am joined by Ryan O'Donnell, who is currently co-founder and CEO of Sunlight, who are the makers of Your Case Plan product, service, I should say, and also a former co-founder and CEO of EmployUs, which, Ryan, I think that was seed grantee in 2014, if my records are correct.
That's right. That's right. For listeners of the last episode that I listened to, Eric Boggs, we were cohort, the same vintage.
Oh, really? Now,
Yeah.
see, that's pretty cool. Because there's a couple pieces of coincidence with you and the organization. I was going to save this for later in the interview to kind of like be like, oh, and see, I did some homework on you. But since it's at kind of at the earliest part of your career, I see you were a marketing intern for Ground Floor. Uh, and was that when they were a Groundwork Labs company?
I think they had just finished Groundwork Labs, maybe because they were working in downtown Raleigh back when there was an AU office on Fayetteville Street. I was a
Oh, that's
Murphy
right.
State intern. It was the kind of months before I started EmployUs. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I knew, I know of them because, John Austin, still remembers them all very fondly going through Groundwork Labs. And they'll forever be known in our halls as kind of like the one that got away because for those of you watching who don't know, Ground Floor is a great, innovative company that is doing crowdfunding for real estate projects. But unfortunately, North Carolina was not an early adopter in that space, so they had to move out of the state. And is that why you kind of said, well, okay, if I can't stay with them, I'll go ahead and start my own company?
I started while I was in college, and we were in a similar like crowdfunding-esque space. We help nonprofits raise money, and when when the news broke that they were going to Atlanta, I was so sad, but I was kind of like, well, I guess it's a good thing. I like wanted like, this was a stepping stone. I knew I wanted to go do another startup, and it was phenomenal to like be there when Ground Floor was, I think, like three or four folks in a broom closet.
Yeah. The only good thing I can say about them having to move to Atlanta is it afforded me an opportunity to be an investor because I cannot, I have kind of a self-imposed prohibition for funding companies in North Carolina for the obvious reason that they may come through our programs at some point. But when they were down there, and I think John was the one who introduced me to him, I was like, what a great idea. So I put a few dollars into that. But I just think that's one of multiple touch points that makes this interview today so special because you really kind of, and I don't mean to be paternalistic here, but you are a few years younger than me. And you kind of came of age, entrepreneurially speaking, here in the ecosystem and really being quite gifted at leveraging the ecosystem to your advantage. And so I thought for, just to get things kicked off, maybe we could start with Employ Us and, what was that like and how did you plug into the ecosystem and, what were some of the key milestones back in the 2014, 2015 timeframe?
Yeah, I mean, it all got started. I was a student in NC State, loved startups. Back when Louis Sheets was running the NC State entrepreneurship program, this is before the eClinic had developed, like Think House had just started, like early
Oh yeah.
days. I think Hub Raleigh was what they called themselves first, before it
Yep.
became HQ and now Raleigh founded. Um, and my first real job, was, making 20 bucks an hour as a recruiter while I was in school working at a search firm in Raleigh called the Nautical Group. And the gentleman who founded and was the chairman and CEO of Nautical Group used to run the largest manpower operation franchise here in the area, Jeff Stocks, and you know, got to meet him through all the various entrepreneurship programs at NC State. And he said, "You're an entrepreneur like me. The recruiting business is so broken, and you're going to find something to fix it. Don't go fix it. You got to go feel the pain of being a recruiter for a bit." So that was my first like real job, and started building the product for EmployUs, just like first for myself to be a better recruiter. And everyone was saying, if you want to get started as a startup, there's this great program, NC Idea. And they just showed, here's all the great startups that have kind of emerged from this program, where they can be, like your first check, first validation, first step towards building a startup. So I applied when I was a student, and we were fortunate to get it. And that was kind of our first few months. Got our first product built, our first customers, our first hires.
Hold on. I got to ask you a question here, because this comes up in these conversations. Are you implying that you applied once and you got it on your first application?
This hopefully is not breaking news. It does occasionally happen, but we
Wow.
won one apply and one award startup pitch. So it was there. We had we had a little bit of traction. At the same time was when the Citrix Red Hat Startup Accelerator was going. It was the first cohort of that. So had just gotten into that program. We had about a dozen or so local startups and recruiting firms using the product, and we were hyper local. I mean, early days of EmployUs, we helped startups hire. We helped some local tech companies hire, like Citrix. So it was had some, like, I think, very early validation that, hey, maybe this product could really help. So we got lucky, I think, honestly, getting a couple of early wins like that.
Well, you know what they say, right? The harder you work, the luckier you get. And
It helps to be very Irish too. I mean, Ryan Patrick O'Donnell, very, very Irish too. Like the Irish here.
I had to comment to our producer here, Christian. I said, I was prepping for today's call, and I'm just smirking. Ryan O'Donnell. I'm from Northeast Ohio, and when we were living up there, our neighbors across the street were the O'Donnells, and their eldest son was named Ryan. And so every time I see your name on a report or a grant update or anything, I just can't help but think, the Ryan O'Donnell from up there, which he's probably about your age too, because that was many years ago. So okay. So we've established you are the curve buster in the room, right? The one that always skews the curve because you aced the test. So you got the CETA grant in 2014. How did that change? And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like, how did that change the speed, the arc, everything that was happening with the company? Like, what happened once you got the seed grant?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was very much like the first money in. I mean, we got a $50K grant from NC Idea. The Citrix Accelerator program had a $25K grant, which was kind of like Citrix's, I feel like, customer contract commitment. Like we'll buy from local startups as well too. So it kind of helped us really get like our first, I'd say, like, enterprise customer. Honestly, like. It gave us a little bit of validation in the space, and it kind of introduced us to a lot of the local startup community in a way where, a student coming out of NC State that's working on his first startup might not otherwise have that opportunity. So for us, it was really helpful to have a little bit of structure, to have those milestones, and be able to say, like, hey, look, we got this grant. Our job is to, make some improvements to the product, get the product into more customers, get a few more people hired, and then get ready for our first fundraise, which happened, I want to say it was like maybe 6 months or 9 months later was when we did our seed round. So
within a year.
Yeah. So super helpful to have some validation and show, hey, like, we're able to raise a little bit of money, deploy it well, de-risk the venture a little bit as much as you can in those early days, and then, take the next step.
So you did a raise. Was that mostly the local capital stack coming in, or did you have to go outside the state or the region?
Yeah, all local. This was at the time when David Gardner was going from like super angel to first raising co-founders. So, and when we first started talking about raising some money. We were looking at raising like a couple $100,000, mostly from local angels. We ended up we raised 750, and it was co-founders led it. Sovereigns Capital participated, and had a couple other angels involved. But
Very, very
all
cool. Was that the only round you had to do before Hierology kind of came in and
we did
acquired y'all?
a bridge round about 2 years later. As we were like pivoting from more of a marketplace product that was very much like pay for success transactional revenue model to a more traditional B2B SaaS, subscription model. And that we raised a little bit extra money. We worked through Engage Ventures down in Atlanta, which, as a side tangent, also brought me right back to ground floor, because the ground floor office was right next to the Engage office in the ATDC building down there. So raised a little bit of money from them and the Wolfpack Investor Network, and then just kind of doubled down on kind of working with some more like medium to large size businesses, and kind of stayed that course until the acquisition.
I'm always so happy when I see somebody like you who's fully taken advantage of the ecosystem, right? You really plugged in because, as you saw firsthand, and I think that's kind of the nutritional value in your story, there was so much here to help you along the way, and then serve you even greater, on this your current go around, at Sunlight. Because let's face it, to be quite candid, when you applied with Sunlight in 2024, so 10 years later, right? You were known to us. You were known. You're a known entity, and just like winning the seed grant de-risks you for all the area funds to fund in you, knowing the success you've had, knowing what you've done, being plugged into the ecosystem, that gives us higher confidence to say, yeah, you're probably a good bet.
Yeah, I remember I had coffee with one of our investors through the Wolfpack Investor Network a few months after we sold to Hierology. And I asked her, he said, like, well, just let me know, on the next one, because it's so hard sometimes. You place bets, and, sometimes it doesn't work out. And we all know the big reasons. It's co-founder drama, poor product market fit, people running out of money. This shit's hard, and
Yeah,
honestly, like, the thing that my co-founder and I will often talk about, I'll cite actually Brian from Ground Floor, because he's the one who I first heard it from. And I just remember him saying, I like to take on entrenched competitors from a position of weakness and win. And it was very much this like cockroach, I will grind as long as it takes. It can be hard, but like that's what you get into it for. Like, we have this strange attraction for insanely hard work. And it was a helpful experience to like go through that and kind of run it all the way through to completion, have the earn out, check all the boxes after the acquisition, and then take some time, recover, recharge, and then
right.
just jump right back into it, and get back to doing the fun stuff.
I had a wrestling coach in college say if muscles were easy, everybody'd have them. And it's a similar thing, right? Like you got to put in the time in the weight room and grind it out. And I couldn't agree more. I even reflecting on my own past entrepreneurial, when I took business away from large national agencies, yeah, we would do a little victory dance in the office and be like, that's right. You didn't even see us coming because
Yep.
you're so big and slow, and in this case, stupid. But I digress. So let me ask you something from the perspective of somebody, 10 years in between seed grants. Needless to say, the ecosystem's a little different today in 2025 than it was in 2014. What I'm just curious, thoughts. Like everybody I'm talking to, I'm asking similar question in the sense of, good, bad, or ugly. I don't care. But like, what's your thinking of when you look at your own experience and the trajectory and the arc that you've had with multiple companies, and to the present? What would be your observation on how things stand at the moment?
I think that a couple of things. I think, like, first of all, our like local startup ecosystem, it's much larger. right, is much like much more developed, right? It can be a lot better. I think Bill Sproul at the CED conference put it really well. And maybe it's like we have to stop comparing ourselves to like an Austin or a Boston and start setting our sights as like a global competitive region. Like that's a different level of playing that we didn't have 10 years ago. We did not have a Pendo skyscraper in the downtown Raleigh skyline 10 years ago. And I remember certain leaders in our entrepreneurial ecosystem back then saying that wouldn't happen. We don't get those unicorns here. We don't get those mega funding rounds. And, now we've got Epic Games, we've got Pendo, we've got some really amazing exits. But we have a lot of founders who like keep on like investing here. We've got more funds investing here. We've got more active university investments here. When I first got started, there wasn't nearly as many programs for young entrepreneurs. We've got the Andrews Accelerator at NC State now. We've got the Miller Fellowship at NC State. But then we also have the Wolfpack Investor Network. And we've got all of the other, university affiliated angel groups. So there's a much better like pipeline for capital. I think the impact of that is that, necessarily folks like me aren't the only ones getting funded, which, back in 2015,
Right.
it was much more difficult, I think, to raise any amount of money, and it was much more expensive to build a startup. So now, like, the cost to build a startup is lower for just about everyone everywhere, and there's more access to capital, more access to mentors, more access to like high quality early stage startup talent that was not as commonplace, back in 2014 and 2015.
Boy, that's saying something, and you're not wrong. And I often, I'll confess a little frustration that I get from time to time when I hear somebody here, founder struggling to start something, and they'll articulate frustration. Oh, it sucks here. You can't. I might have to go somewhere else to start. And it's all I can do not to say you clearly haven't spent a lot of time outside this ecosystem, because if you did, you'd understand how special this is. And I know that sounds patently self-serving, and I don't mean it that way. I just, having spent a lot of time doing this on a national and global scale, I know what it's like to be in the desert, right? And there's a lot of places in this country where trying to start something, you couldn't be more alone. You don't have that here, right? Now, what you said struck me about, the early days, people saying, oh, things like, Pendo couldn't happen. When I hear that feedback, I'm always like, well, whether you think we can or we can't, you're right either way, right? And the group that thinks we can't, they've been kind of pushed to the side in favor of those who believed. And I think we're the beneficiary of that. And you stand in my view here as exhibits, A, B, and C with everything that you've always done. So that being said, you run into Ryan O'Donnell from 15 years ago. Maybe he's getting out of state right now. By the way, since we're loving on state, let me also add the Wilson College of Textiles. They are very affiliated with the NSF engine that I have the great privilege to serve right now. Well, until Doge closes it, I should say, but tremendous. So any entrepreneur watching this that has any interest in anything to do with textiles, fabrics, fibers, circularity, you got to check out, the college, the Wilson College of Textiles, because it's a fantastic resource. But what do you say to the Ryan O'Donnell coming out now saying, hey, I got an idea for a startup?
It's probably all the same things that I imagine a lot of people told me when I was a student, like just go ahead and get started with it, go sell someone, go build something, like just don't just talk about it, like get out of the classroom. I think that's one of the biggest things that Louis Sheets just impressed upon all the students going through the NC State entrepreneurship program is like startups, they might start in a dorm room, they might start, incubated out of a classroom project, but like, that's not where the startups stay. You gotta get out the classroom. And I was like, when I was working on my very first startup, we were a bunch of students, and we were very much that like classic student startup, going to pitch competitions, doing the very much like collegiate entrepreneurial experience. We didn't really know what we were building, and we kind of lucked into some early traction. And I would just say, like to 21-year-old Ryan's, like just keep leaving campus to go. I remember we went to like the Bull City Venture Conference. They needed interns to help check people in. Do that. Those were some of the most like informative early experiences that I had. That like any early stage, like student entrepreneur or founder, I always tell them, like, you want to go to those things. Grumpypalooza. You want to go to that. You want to go to the CED conference. You want to like find your way to go meet with those people, so that it's important to hang out with your fellow founders and on campus. But I think it's just important to start meeting all the people in the local startup ecosystem, because one thing that, I don't have the comparison of having lived in another market to know what that entrepreneurial ecosystem is like. But what I've heard so many times and what I've always felt is like, this is one of the most like collaborative places where like there's, in my opinion, very little ego with just about everybody in the local startup ecosystem. I feel just about anyone that I've ever reached out to has been willing to, at least take a coffee meeting, take a quick call, introduce you to someone, ask how they can help, whether you're a first-time founder, repeat founder, big name investor, like people just like want to help each other. And I think like the early advice is always just to lean into that, and don't be afraid to ask for help from folks who have, been there, done that a few times.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. If I can add to your list of things to take advantage of, there's this little summit we have in the fall. So where we bring several hundred people from all over the state, ecosystem, partners and funders and policymakers. So not a bad place. And we typically need a few interns for that little soiree every year too, but I take your point. So you sold EmployUs to Hireology in
21.
2021.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had it right here. Exited 2021. And then you did some investing. You were an asset in the ecosystem. If my research is accurate, is that a fair statement?
A little bit, although most of them were personal projects that we funded to see what the next thing would be.
But you still put money on the street.
Yes, literally in some cases. We did. We funded a couple projects, some in the real estate world, trying to increase the supply of affordable homes for former foster youth. So got our real world experience, in that, when you're doing startup land, sometimes it's all software world. You don't realize what it's like when you're actually dealing with 2x4s and screws and hammers, and it's a different world in the physical world. Yeah, we did that. Advised a bunch of startups. Tried to help as much as we can, and help a few folks apply for some grants, apply for some funding. So just tried to roll up our sleeves, and my co-founder and I incubated a couple of projects. One of them became Sunlight, in your case plan, and just tried to help other folks who are like building their own things to hopefully make a few less mistakes than we did along the way with EmployUs, because we certainly made plenty of mistakes along the way.
I mean, it wouldn't be entrepreneurship if you didn't, right? Again, if muscles were easy, everybody'd have them. If entrepreneurship was easy, everybody would be wildly successful, multi-exited entrepreneurs, right? I think you said it earlier, the technical phrase was, this shit is hard. I mean, it is, and it's just the nature of it. So if you don't have the stomach for it, right, you should probably be doing something else. But let's pick up then where your current passion is, because as happy as we were to support you with EmployUs back in the day, I think we always look for impact, right? Like when we choose to fund a company, it's a question of what impact can they have, and that's economic impact, because we're economic development. So it's potential to create jobs, revenue, tax base, and things like that. But we also consider like, what's the product, right? Does the world need another source of Sharpie markers, for example, right? Or can you do something that's making the world a better place? And I think that's one of the reasons most of us were pretty excited when you applied with, Sunlight and your case plan, because you're doing something that's really important. And I don't want to steal your thunder. I want to let you take a moment to brag on what you're currently doing. But the point I will make here, and I'll give you the mic in a second, but the point I want to make is, for anybody that's watching this is common. It's the serial entrepreneur effect, right? This is why we are working so hard to redefine economic development in the terms of supporting people like you, because you will be the origin of multiple companies over your lifetime. And my God, are you even in your mid-30s yet? Right? 32, and you're on company like number 4?
Depends on how you count them.
Depends upon how you count, like all the ones you invested and funded too, right? So just think about that from an economic impact standpoint, why that's important. So now, with that said, let me turn over the floor to you to talk about, Sunlight.
Yeah, it really all started out of just a raw frustration for myself. I was a foster parent, so in the final years of EmployUs before we sold to Hierology, my wife and I became foster parents back in 2019, and we just got to see our country's foster care system very up close and personal, and it was almost like living in a different world, because we're talking about tech startup land, and we've got all these amazing tools at our disposal. We would talk about how do we make it easy for people to get jobs through referrals at EmployUs. And then in the child welfare system, we're talking about, a child's life, a family, and how so many times it's a world of like fax machines and snail mail, as I always call it. Is like, it's a situation where so many times we don't do what's best for a child. We don't support families because there's so many miscommunications that happen, so much bureaucracy, red tape, and unfortunately, a lot of turnover. So these are all the problems I faced as a foster parent. Our foster son was in the system for far too many years, in a situation where, he had a loving and safe family who could have raised him, his father and his grandmother. And it was just crazy to see how, it wasn't just like 5 years behind. It was like 20 years behind. I was like, what are we doing? And I just wanted something better, not just like for me, but for like the actual families impacted by the system. And when we sold EmployUs, it was just a crazy time of our life. This is the middle of COVID. Our foster son's dad's over at our house. They had one of their visits in the middle of the summer. They just got back from our neighborhood pool. They're dripping wet in the living room. You can imagine that. And the DocuSign comes through. EmployUs is sold, right? So our life changed significantly. And I was like, we've just got to do something to fix this, because it's unacceptable. Like, we've got far too many kids in care who are just wondering, what permanency looks like. Like, why are they stuck in care? And, when will they get to go home? When will they not have to have so much uncertainty in their life? So that was kind of the origin story. Was just honestly a lot of frustration. And we kind of spent about 2 years and about $250,000 looking at different options of how you could improve the system, right? Is it a policy thing? Is it a staffing thing? Is it transparency and reporting? Is it real estate? So we kind of looked at a lot of different things, and we built a lot of products. And what we found really made a huge difference is by improving communication. And that's really what we're doing at Sunlight. We built a product called Your Case Plan. It's like my chart for foster care. It gives everyone a secure platform to communicate with one another, and kind of fills in the gaps that exist, because we're working with government agencies that oftentimes have these, giant software projects that don't usually work very well. And
Right.
We're coming in with this, very easy to use mobile app that is kind of like light years ahead of anything that this system and these folks, whether you're a foster parent, social worker, attorney, have. So it's been a real blast. We're like almost a year old, coming up on our first year soon here. But just having a blast building great products that some people otherwise would never have access to, because most people, let's face it, they're not that interested in selling to government, and they're not interested in selling to folks like social workers and public defenders, and
Right.
the kind of space we like fighting for the underdogs. We like, equipping the people doing the work. So it's been a blast to like jump into that world, and really just like help them help their clients.
I mean, I would say at the risk of stating the obvious in the current political environment, you could hardly blame people for kind of like shying away from selling to government, right? And so I think you're probably taking on even a bigger challenge than you may be aware of. Now, when you typically start let's call it a generic, well, let's say EmployUs, right? Like you can understand a commercial interest and financial interest to be like acquired so that you get your exit moment. But with Sunlight, I mean, is it just altruism, or could you see like are there national players that have financial incentives or any kind of incentives aligned to help you succeed and grow, or are we just depending on well-intended, overworked, undercompensated staff and people in broken systems and know it? Are we just depending upon them struggling at improvement on the fringes, and that's how you're going to grow? And is that what success is going to look like?
I think sometimes people don't think about government as a good market for all the reasons you mentioned. I mean, we called our company Sunlight because it's the best disinfectant, and we believe that wholeheartedly. And I think for a lot of government systems, we spend an awfully lot of money getting very little returns, and I think that's the unlock that technology can have. And we spend a lot of money trying to help people, and I spend a lot of time with like departments of health and human services, a lot of nonprofits. And, it's not just like how much money are we spending, what do we spend on different technology tools, but it's like, what's the actual impact of those products, right? If we are successful in a new state, we are pulling a giant lever for improving the lives of children and families by reducing the time that children spend in care. So that's the mission, honestly, but it's backed by a good revenue model. We received a small investment from a group called the Eagle Freedom Fund, that's a impact investment fund focused on reducing child exploitation and human trafficking. And they have a thesis on a lot of their investments that they say is native impact, which they would like contrast to like a Tom Shoes model, a give one, get one, or like a supplier, impact sourcing model. But it's really where every dollar of revenue that company takes in is solving a social problem so that interests are aligned. Like from a financial standpoint, we serve more people, we help more people, we make more money, we're able to serve more people and continue to grow. So for us, we don't see it as like two different missions. It's one mission where, we have a good revenue model that can scale. And what we're careful of is like, we don't want to raise too much money from people that aren't aligned on the impact side, because there's a lot of money chasing big government contracts that builds, in my opinion, crappy products that don't actually help anyone. And we just think we walk into those rooms and we say, hey, we got something, it's cheaper, it's better, it's faster, and it actually helps people, we'll win. So that's what we're like really excited about being able to build. And it lets us be a bit of like a both and, where it's attractive from a financial perspective, but we're set up in a way where, I probably couldn't have done this when I was 19 years old, so I have a little bit of learnings of what to do, what not to do. We were profitable from day one. So it's very different than EmployUs, where we money to get started, So we're trying to do it this one the right way, and in a way where perhaps a lot of other companies serving the public, maybe they raised too much money and they weren't able to focus on their impact. Or maybe they didn't raise enough money and they weren't able to scale to actually help a lot of people. So we're trying to thread that needle. So we'll see how it goes, We're going to certainly take our step up at bat for it,
Well, I commend the effort. It just, again, to me, it's got a very firm altruistic, bent to it. But when I think about it and when I dwelled on it, it's like, to me, I don't know, if I were in your shoes, it'd probably be a calling to me, and not just like a company, right? Like you started with, you had that experience with your foster child. And I think that's a lot of times some really great companies are spawned from, the experience of the founders who have seen that firsthand and go like, I can't believe we can't do this in a better way. And there has to be a better way, right? And you're showing that. I just was curious, like, what does success look like when the state of Oklahoma just says, okay, we're going to give you $5 million a year for an unlimited license, to use the platform throughout the entire state, or like, what does that scale moment look like? Or maybe it doesn't have to scale, right? Because that's one of those other assumptions that people make, that success is when you scale to a point of exit. For a lot of people, they don't even want an exit, and I totally get. You alluded to it when you said we'd only take money from the right people. What's implied in that statement is that there's wrong money to take for certain reasons that you've probably experienced.
Yeah, I mean, there's I can name 9 figures of investment that has gone into my space, so to speak, a mix of nonprofit funding, for-profit funding, that in my opinion has just been kind of like lit on fire, honestly. So sometimes you fund things that you think are going to be good opportunities, but if they don't actually help people, if they're not solving the right problems, then why are we funding them? Almost
Right.
gives us a bad name. But what you said was really interesting, and it's like the founder's personal experience, like just trying to solve that problem. It didn't dawn on me until we had like already gotten Sunlight up and running. But I was a recruiter for about 6 months before I started EmployUs. And you remember what my co-founder, our first investor, Jeff, said? You got to feel the pain. I've certainly felt the pain of the foster care system. I've seen that in our families that we've worked with. Certainly in our foster son's case, he was in foster care for 7 years, right? And you don't get those birthdays back. You don't get those Christmases back. And it's one of those things where someone told me, well, if you're doing a startup, you got to prepare for like a 10-year journey. And, looking back on EmployUs, I didn't realize it would be a 10-year journey. But I had a blast doing it. I learned a ton. But this is one of those things where like you can run at this for a lot longer than 10 years. And if it's a business that, quote unquote, only does $1 million or $2 million in revenue, but we solve the problem, I'd take that. But I think it could be a much bigger thing. I think it could like truly be kind of national scale. I was just meeting with some folks here in North Carolina involved in our child welfare system, and like the ROI is insane. In the child welfare system, we spend an inordinate amount of money delivering some of the worst outcomes, in terms of what happens to families after a child's removed, what happens to that child throughout their life. And we were just making a very simple ROI calculation for some elected officials, showing that we could probably save the state of North Carolina $50 million if we simply sent text reminders to families, letting them know when their court dates are.
Isn't
Now,
that amazing?
I sent a lot of text messages that EmployUs. We were notifying people of their interviews. That's technically not a hard thing to do, but it's one of those levers that if you've never built products that are kind of centered on actually helping people, you don't think about it in those terms.
Yep.
And the state of North Carolina has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on products that never even went live, trying to help, families in the child welfare system, social services, court system. So, there's, I think, a massive opportunity if you like zoom out at a state level, at a national level. But it really kind of all boils down to like that $50 million savings. That's if we just reduce the time children are in care by a couple of months by reducing court delays. So this isn't rocket science. It's just like, we've got to be kind of relentless about building something that actually works and then doing whatever it takes to make that happen. And that's like one of the things I think like why I love startups so much. It's like, you don't get that anywhere else, and it takes entrepreneurs to like find those opportunities and then just like, run through a couple of brick walls to make that happen.
You're the embodiment of a phrase I'm very proud to say, and that is that our greatest natural resource is the entrepreneurial potential of our people. And that's because entrepreneurs will solve the world's problems. They create the new. right? They empower, uh, following generations with better solutions and better standards of living and quality of life. And I think collectively that has so much more value to humanity and society than anything we can harvest from the sun or dig up from the ground. And that's why, and you just embody that. So I think that's a great place to land this episode. Ryan, thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for being a great embodiment of the entrepreneurial mindset. Please keep us posted. I expect and hope that we can do an update on Sunlight, maybe not 10 years from now. It'd be nice if we could do a little sooner. And do remember that your family here, twice now, we've adopted you, so to speak, by virtue of being a grantee. And if there's anything we can do to help you along the way, do not hesitate to ask.
It's been awesome building, and when I first got started working on Sunlight, I knew the first thing was like, I wonder if we can get an NCIDEA grant. Like, let's go 2 for 2. And I think what's incredible is you all write the checks, right? And now you're writing a lot more checks into a lot more startups, and it's incredible to see, because when we first got started, it was just the seed program. We're getting started with 50K, and now there's so many different programs helping so many entrepreneurs. It's really, really encouraging to see. So I just want to say thanks for all your leadership and everything that NCIDEA has been able to do. You help not just us, but like a ton of companies that we're seeing, and it's just been awesome to be a part of the ecosystem.
Well, it's our privilege to serve. So thanks for what you do, and until we meet again.
See you later.